The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 24, A Roof Over Hope. Creating safe emotional spaces. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, the space where we strip away the layers, sit with the raw stuff, and talk about what most people skip past. Before the walls go up in any rebuild, you need a roof, something that shelters you, a place where hope can live without being battered by the next storm. Without that covering, even the strongest foundations feel exposed, and the work of building can feel impossible to sustain. In this episode, we're talking about how to create that roof in the emotional sense, the structures, routines, relationships, and environments that give you safety, stability, and space to breathe. Because hope doesn't just appear, it grows in the shelter you create for it. So if you're somewhere between tearing down the old and building the new, this is about learning to protect your progress without closing yourself off from life. So let's begin. The first sheet of shelter. Every episode in this arc is a step deeper into the rebuild. Each part carries its focus, but they all connect back to the core question. What do you need in place before the rest can stand? The themes and attributes here aren't abstract concepts. They're the practical, lived qualities that make rebuilding possible. They give us a way to recognize what's already present, what's missing, and what can be intentionally strengthened. Themes and attributes. Theme: establishing safety before structure. Attributes: grounding, containment, stability, and foresight. Before walls rise, before windows open, the priority is a roof, not for comfort, but for protection. In both construction and emotional rebuilding, it's the initial safeguard that shields you from further damage while you work on what's underneath. It's the line between constantly bracing for the next blow and finally being able to exhale. When shelter comes first, imagine standing in an open field when the sky cracks open with a sudden downpour. You're already drenched, but finding shelter changes everything. The rain still falls, but it's no longer striking you directly. You can look around, breathe deeply, and make decisions without the sting of every drop distracting you. That's what creating emotional safety feels like in the early stages of a rebuild. It doesn't fix everything. It doesn't even mean you're warm yet. But it gives you the space to dry out a little, to think clearly, to stop reacting to every gust of wind. A roof doesn't mean you're finished. It means you have a place to plan your next move without being battered from all sides. Personal reflection. There have been times in my life when creating that roof wasn't optional. It was survival. I've faced overwhelming work environments where the pressure never seemed to stop. The demands stacked up and I felt my focus fray. Back then, I started creating micro-shelters in my day, walking away from my desk for a few minutes, turning my phone off after a certain time, allowing myself to say no without guilt. They weren't big moves, but they created breathing room. In personal relationships, the stakes were sometimes higher. I've been in situations where the breakdown between me and another person was so complete that, even though we were living in the same space, I needed to reclaim a separate sleeping area just to protect my mental and emotional state. On a couple of occasions, I've removed myself entirely, leaving the country to find distance from the noise, to ground myself somewhere new. At first, those decisions felt like defeat. I wondered if I was running away. But with time, I understood they were deliberate acts of self-preservation. The time away allowed me to breathe, to reflect not only on what others had done, but also on my part in the dynamic. I used that space to find forgiveness, sometimes for them, sometimes for myself. And slowly I noticed a shift. My routines became healthier. My perspective widened. Those temporary roofs, whether physical distance or quiet personal rituals, gave me enough safety to begin rebuilding without carrying all the chaos inside. Psychological insight. Looking back, I can see that what I was doing matched exactly what trauma recovery theory recommends. Judith Herman's three-stage model of trauma recovery, 1992, places safety as the non-negotiable first step before processing or reintegration. Without this, deeper healing work risks collapsing under emotional strain. I wasn't consciously following a model at the time, but my instinct to create a roof, to stabilize before delving into deeper repair, was aligned with that principle. Research in environmental psychology also supports this. Evans and Weiner, 2007, found that perceived control over one's environment directly reduces physiological stress responses. When I claimed a room for myself or physically relocated, I wasn't just escaping conflict. I was reducing the constant sensory and emotional inputs that kept my nervous system in high alert. In my own experience, those temporary shelters didn't just shield me. They reset my internal state enough for me to approach challenges from a place of choice rather than pure reaction. I could think strategically instead of defensively. And when I was ready to step out from under that roof, I was stronger for having stood there first. Insight prompts. Where in your current life do you feel most exposed emotionally or mentally? What would a first sheet of shelter look like for you right now? Theory in action. Choose one overexposed area of your life and introduce a single protective measure, a time boundary, a physical retreat, or a supportive presence. See it as your first layer of covering, a temporary but necessary shield while you prepare for the longer rebuild. Laying beams of trust. Once the first roof is in place, even if temporary, the next task in the rebuild is choosing what will hold it steady. In construction, these are the beams, strong enough to bear weight, placed in alignment to support the whole structure. In life, the beams are the sources of trust that keep hope from collapsing. Without them, the roof may exist, but it wobbles, and any strong wind could take it down. Beam, trust as structural integrity. Attributes, reliability, alignment, discernment, and patience. These beams are not installed in a rush. They need careful selection and deliberate placement. Too many weak supports and the roof will sag. Too few and it won't hold. In human terms, this is the slow work of identifying people, routines, and beliefs are capable of supporting your renewed sense of safety. The weight of what holds you picture a roof balanced on mismatched sticks, leaning at awkward angles. Even without a storm, it's always on the edge of collapse. That's what happens when we trust too quickly after a rupture. In the hurry to feel safe again, we sometimes grab whatever's nearby, the first friendly voice, the first habit that feels familiar, and place it at the core of our structure. But not all supports can hold weight. Some crack under pressure. Some were never meant to bear that load in the first place. True rebuilding asks us to slow down and check the grain of each beam. To ask, will this bend without breaking? Will it remain steady even if the weather turns? Can it be integrated with the others to create balance? And perhaps hardest of all, am I willing to wait for the right beams rather than forcing something unready into place? Personal reflection. In my rebuilds, trust has been one of the slowest things to re-establish. I've learned that rushing this part almost always backfires. There have been moments in relationships where I wanted so badly for things to feel safe again that I placed far too much weight on shaky foundations. I would take one gesture of goodwill as proof that everything was fixed, and lean on it as if it were unshakable. Inevitably, it couldn't hold. Over time, I began to change my approach. Instead of looking for quick reassurance, I started looking for repeated consistency. It wasn't about perfection. It was about alignment between words and actions over time. In work settings, this meant watching how people responded under pressure before deciding to collaborate closely. In personal relationships, it meant letting trust grow naturally instead of demanding it on a deadline. There's a deep relief in this slower process. It allows you to test the strength of a beam before placing it in the heart of your structure. And when a support proves steady, the whole rebuild feels more solid because you know you're not leaning on something that will give way the moment things get heavy. Psychological Insight Attachment Theory, Bowlby 1969, Ainsworth 1978, helps explain why we're tempted to rush trust after disruption. Those with anxious attachment tendencies often seek immediate reassurance, while avoidant types may skip the trust-building phase entirely, relying instead on self-sufficiency. Neither extreme produces strong beams. Secure attachment develops through predictable, reliable responses over time, the very thing that can't be faked or fast-tracked. From a cognitive behavioral perspective, distorted thinking patterns like emotional reasoning, I feel safe now, so it must be safe, can lead us to misjudge the strength of a support. This can be countered by reality testing, actively checking for patterns, not just moments. In my case, slowing down trust building wasn't easy. There were times I doubted myself, wondering if I was being too guarded. But when I saw how many conflicts or collapses I'd avoided simply by giving relationships and routines more time to prove their reliability, I knew this shift was essential. The patience it took to select the right beams ultimately made the rest of the rebuild far less fragile. Insight prompts. What supports in your life have proven strong under repeated testing? Where might you be leaning on something that hasn't yet shown it can hold weight? Theory in action. Choose one current source of trust in your life, a person, habit, or belief, and give it a stress test. Observe it in different conditions over the next month. Does it remain steady? Does it adapt? Use what you learn to decide whether it belongs as a permanent beam in your rebuild. Walls that breathe with beams in place, the walls start to rise. But here's the thing, walls are meant to protect, not suffocate. In rebuilding, walls need to breathe. They should keep out the elements that harm, while allowing light and fresh air to enter. Overbuilding can trap us in a self-made fortress. Underbuilding leaves us exposed. Art lies in balance. Theme, protection with permeability. Attributes, boundaries, openness, adaptability, selectivity. Walls that breathe offer security without isolation. They define the space as yours while keeping it connected to the outside world. The fortress problem: think of a castle with walls so thick and high that the people inside never see the horizon. They're safe, yes, but also cut off from everything beyond. Now imagine a simple home with open shutters and screened windows, safe from intruders and storms, yet open to conversation, to sunlight, to possibility. In emotional rebuilding, our walls are our boundaries. After hurt or loss, it's tempting to build them high and solid, shutting out anything that might harm us again. But without windows and vents, the air inside grows stale. We need connection as much as we need protection. Walls that breathe remind us we're part of a living, changing world, and that we can be safe without being sealed away. Personal reflection: I've lived behind both kinds of walls. After certain experiences, I went into full defense mode. I kept communication minimal, avoided new relationships, and withdrew from environments that felt unpredictable. It was quiet and controlled, but also lonely. Over time, I realized my safety had become a cage. When I began adjusting my walls, I did it in small, cautious steps, allowing a conversation to go a little deeper, saying yes to an invitation, sharing a little more about my work. Each time I checked in with myself: did this feel safe? Did it feel nourishing? It was a learning curve. Some openings led to drafts I had to patch. Others let in sunlight I hadn't felt in years. Gradually, I came to see that the point wasn't to choose between safety and openness, it was to integrate both. Now, my walls protect what matters most, but they're not sealed. They breathe, and so do I. Psychological Insight Boundary Theory, Ashforth et al., 2000, highlights the importance of permeability in maintaining psychological well-being. Completely rigid boundaries can create isolation, while overly porous ones can lead to burnout or harm. The healthiest boundaries are flexible, adjusted depending on the context and the relationship. Polyvagal theory, Porges 2011, also plays a role here. Feeling safe enough to open the windows of our emotional house is a physiological process. When our nervous system detects safety cues, it allows social engagement to emerge. When cues of danger are constant, we retreat. By consciously managing our boundaries, we can train our nervous system to recognize and respond to safety more readily. In my rebuilds, learning to breathe through the walls meant permitting myself to adjust boundaries without seeing it as weakness. It taught me that flexibility is not vulnerability. It's a strength that allows both safety and connection to coexist. Insight prompts. Where in your life have your walls become too rigid, cutting off light and air? Where might you need to strengthen them to feel safe enough to open up? Theory in action: pick one boundary to adjust this week. If it's too rigid, open it slightly in a controlled way. If it's too porous, reinforce it with a clear limit. Notice how these adjustments affect your sense of both safety and connection. The quiet inside: once the roof, beams and walls are in place, the rebuild enters a quieter phase. This is when you start to notice the space inside, not just its size, but its atmosphere. Without the constant noise of crisis, you can hear yourself again. Creating an interior of peace is just as critical as the structure itself. Aim, interior calm as a foundation for growth. Attributes, stillness, reflection, intentionality, self-nourishment. The rebuild isn't just about surviving the weather outside, it's about making the inside a place you want to live. When the hammering stops, the early days of rebuilding are loud with saws, hammers, and the shouts of effort. But eventually there's a pause. The frame stands, the roof holds, and the walls are solid. You step inside and there's quiet. It's in that silence that the real emotional atmosphere begins to take shape. Some people find this quite unsettling after so much noise. Without the distraction of a crisis, unprocessed feelings can surface. Others find it nourishing, like the first deep breath after a storm passes. Either way, this is the moment to shape the tone of your new interior, to decide what kind of space you'll live in day to day. Personal reflection. I've had rebuild periods where the silence felt almost too loud. After months or years of constant tension, the absence of conflict made me restless. It took time to understand that I wasn't missing the chaos, I was simply unused to peace. In those moments, I turned to small intentional rituals, lighting a candle before starting work, keeping certain spaces in my home free of screens, listening to music that matched the calm I wanted to cultivate. These weren't grand gestures, but they set the tone for the life I was building inside those walls. Over time, the quiet stopped feeling like emptiness and started feeling like possibility. As psychological insight mindfulness-based stress reduction, Kabat-Zinn, 1990, shows that deliberately cultivating stillness can reduce anxiety, improve focus, and increase emotional regulation. The quiet inside isn't just an absence of noise, it's a chosen mental environment. From a neuroplasticity perspective, regularly returning to states of calm reshapes neural pathways, making peace more accessible over time. This means that what feels strange at first can become your new baseline. For me, embracing the quiet was about replacing the mental soundtrack of constant urgency with something more deliberate. At first it felt awkward, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. But as the routine settled in, I realized I was no longer bracing for the next blow. The quiet had become home. Insight prompts. How comfortable are you with stillness in your life right now? What simple rituals could you introduce to set the tone for your emotional interior? Theory in action. Create one daily moment of deliberate quiet, even 5 minutes. Use it to check in with yourself, not to plan or problem solve. Over time, notice how this shapes your inner atmosphere. Lighting for growth. With the structure built and the interior beginning to take shape, the next step is illumination. Light doesn't just help us see, it shapes how we feel in a space, how we move through it, and whether we even want to be there. In the emotional rebuild, light represents the influences, perspectives, and moments of joy that guide us forward. Without it, even the most carefully built space can feel cold and uninviting. Light as emotional nourishment. Attributes: perspective, optimism, inspiration, receptivity. Choosing the right light and knowing when to dim or brighten, it is an act of self-awareness. It's about letting in enough to grow without being blinded or burnt. Finding the right angle. If you've ever been in a room lit only by a single harsh bulb, you know how uncomfortable it can be. The shadows are deep, the colors distorted, and the whole place feels smaller than it is. But step into a space where light streams in from multiple angles, soft, warm, balanced, and everything changes. In life, the light comes from our inputs, the people we listen to, the stories we absorb, and the way we interpret events. If those sources are harsh or narrow, our perspective shrinks. But when we choose our light thoughtfully, mixing inspiration with realism, hope with groundedness, we create conditions where growth feels natural rather than forced. Personal reflection. There have been seasons where I didn't notice how dim the light in my own life had become. I was still going through the motions, working, connecting with others, but I wasn't inviting in much that genuinely nourished me. It wasn't until I started deliberately choosing different inputs that I noticed the shift. Reading books that expanded my thinking, seeking conversations with people who inspired me, stepping outside at sunrise just to see the light change. One of the most powerful changes came from adjusting how I consumed news and social media. I didn't cut them out entirely, but I chose the windows more carefully, filtering out what left me feeling heavy or hopeless. This wasn't about denial. It was about ensuring my inner space wasn't flooded with a single unbalanced light source. Over time, I found that the right illumination made the whole rebuild process feel more alive. Psychological insight environmental psychology research shows that light profoundly affects mood, productivity, and emotional regulation. Natural light, in particular, is linked to higher serotonin levels, which can elevate mood and increase resilience. Metaphorically, this extends to the light of our influences, what we expose our minds and hearts to daily. From a positive psychology perspective, Seligman, 2011, cultivating positive emotions is not about ignoring reality, but broadening our cognitive and emotional range, a principle known as the broaden and build theory. Just as plants grow towards light, our capacity for creativity, connection, and problem solving expands when we consciously let in nourishing inputs. For me, the realization was that I didn't have to accept whatever light happened to filter. I could position my life so that the angles and quality of illumination supported growth. Insight prompts. What sources of light in your life leave you feeling nourished and expansive? Are there harsh or narrow light sources you need to adjust or limit? Theory and action audit your daily inputs for 1 week. Each ask, does this illuminate or dim my inner space? Keep what lights you up and adjust what doesn't. Furnishing for function and comfort. The walls are solid, the light is right, and now comes the part that makes a space truly livable, furnishing it. In an emotional rebuild, this isn't about physical decor, but the habits, relationships, and practices that make life both functional and enjoyable. A space with only essentials can feel stark. One crammed with the wrong things can feel overwhelming. Theme: intentional choices that support both practicality and joy. Attributes: balance, discernment, adaptability, personal expression. Furnishing is about aligning your environment with your values, so it works for you rather than against you. More than a place to sit. Imagine walking into a beautiful house with nothing but a single chair in the middle of the room. It's functional, you can sit, but it doesn't invite you to stay, relax, or live. Now imagine a space arranged with care. A comfortable seat by the window, a table where conversation naturally happens, objects that remind you of what matters most. This is the difference between surviving and thriving. In our lives, furnishing is the stage where we choose what to bring into our daily rhythms. It's where we decide which relationships deserve space at the table, which habits belong in the corner, and which distractions have no place at all. Personal reflection. When I've rushed through the furnishing stage, I've often ended up filling my days with activities and people that didn't fit the life I was trying to build. It's easy to say yes to everything that looks appealing in the moment, but then you realize your schedule is cluttered, your energy is drained, and your space no longer feels like your own. When I slowed down, I began choosing more intentionally. I kept practices that served me in multiple ways, like walking, which gives me exercise, headspace, and time in nature all at once. I surrounded myself with people who encouraged my growth rather than distracting me from it. This selective furnishing made my emotional home somewhere I wanted it to be, not just somewhere I happened to live. Psychological insight self-determination theory, Deshi and Ryan, 1985, suggests that human well-being depends on fulfilling three core needs: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Furnishing your emotional space is an opportunity to meet all three: autonomy through choosing what truly belongs, competence through structuring your environment to support your goals, and relatedness through relationships that fit your values. Research on choice architecture, Thaler and Sunstein, 2008, also shows that the way we arrange our environment can make certain behaviors easier or harder. By furnishing your space, physically and emotionally, in ways that align with your priorities, you naturally steer yourself towards the life you want to live. In my rebuilds, this meant resisting the urge to fill the room quickly. The more deliberate I was, the more my space felt like a reflection of me rather than a storage unit for everyone else's expectations. Insight prompts. What habits or relationships are truly furnishing your life right now, and which are just taking up space? How could you rearrange your room to better fit your values? Theory in action. Choose one corner of your emotional or physical life to refurnish this week. Remove one element that no longer serves you and replace it with something that does. Securing the roofline. Even the best built roof needs securing, flashing to keep water out and anchors to hold it against storms. In emotional terms, securing the roofline is about sustaining safety and hope in the long term. It's the final check before moving fully into your rebuilt life. Theme: long-term resilience and maintenance. Attributes: consistency, vigilance, adaptability, and foresight. A rebuild isn't just about reaching completion, it's about ensuring it lasts. The quiet guardrails a house can look perfect on the day it's finished, but if the roofline isn't secured, the first heavy rain will reveal leaks. The work of maintenance isn't dramatic, but it's what keeps the place livable. The same goes for emotional rebuilding. You don't just build hope once and expect it to last forever. It needs checking, reinforcing, and sometimes minor repairs to keep it strong. Personal reflection. I've learned that the work doesn't end when things look complete. Some of the hardest moments come after the initial rebuilding, when you have to stay consistent without the urgency of crisis pushing you. There were times I let routines slide or ignored small cracks in relationships, telling myself they weren't a big deal, only to find they grew into bigger issues later. Now I take maintenance seriously. I check in with myself regularly, even when things are going well. I keep watch for old habits creeping back, for patterns that might compromise the stability I've worked so hard to create. It's not about paranoia, it's about respecting the work I've already put in. Psychological insight relapse prevention models in behavioral psychology stress that post-change maintenance is a distinct stage of growth, not just a continuation of the initial rebuild. Without active strategies, it's easy to slip into old patterns simply because they're familiar. From a systems theory perspective, every system, whether a house or a human life, requires ongoing input to remain stable. Left alone, entropy sets in. This doesn't mean living in constant vigilance, but it does mean integrating maintenance into the rhythm of life. For me, securing the roofline means regular reflection, honest communication, and keeping contingency plans for when the unexpected happens. It's the quiet guardrails that let me live without constantly fearing collapse. Insight prompts. What maintenance habits could help you keep your rebuilt life strong? Where have small cracks appeared that need attention before they grow? Theory in action: schedule one maintenance day each month for your emotional life. Review your routines, relationships, and boundaries. Adjust where needed to keep your roofline secure. Holding the shelter a roof doesn't stop the storms from coming, but it makes them survivable. The shelter you build for yourself isn't a fortress to hide in. It's a living space that allows you to grow without constant fear of collapse. Creating safe emotional spaces isn't just about retreating from what's unsafe. It's about building conditions where your inner life can thrive. Sometimes that means stepping back from noise. Sometimes it means bringing in light and warmth deliberately. And sometimes it means maintenance, quietly checking for leaks before they become floods. If there's one thing to carry from this, it's that hope is a living thing. It needs covering, protection, and care. Build your roof with intention, and you'll have a place that not only shelters you, but also welcomes in the people and possibilities that are meant to be part of your new life. You've been listening to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Until next time, stay human, stay awake, and keep the roof over hope. James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse: a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3. introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 the simulated self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 the spell of the mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 conscious seduction, journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 the myth of sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 the algorithmic mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 the noise of knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 belief machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 submerged signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 the alchemy within traces, food, frequency, and the forgotten intelligence of the body. Episode 20 encoded flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.